The line at the bank stretched longer than anyone had patience for, but for Arif Malik, time wasn't just ticking, it was collapsing. His hands trembled as he clutched a worn-out withdrawal slip, the ink slightly smudged from sweat. $50. That was all he needed. $50 to keep the electricity from being cut off. $50 to make sure his daughter didn't have to sleep in the dark again. And yet, as he stepped forward, he had no idea that this small, desperate request would unravel a moment that would silence a man who had never been silenced before. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of human connection, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echoes the Stories. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. Arif hadn't always lived like this. There was a time when mornings began with laughter, not anxiety. Back when his wife, Meher, was alive, their tiny apartment felt like a palace. She used to hum while cooking breakfast, their daughter Syra dancing around with mismatched socks and messy hair. Life wasn't perfect, but it was full. Then illness came quietly, like a shadow creeping across sunlight, and before Arif could understand it, Meher was gone, leaving behind silence that no amount of courage could fill. Since then, Arif had become everything: father, mother, protector, provider. He worked long shifts at a warehouse on the edge of the city, lifting boxes until his back screamed in protest. Nights were spent helping Syra with homework, cooking simple meals, and pretending everything was okay. But lately, even pretending had become difficult. Bills piled up. Overtime hours were cut. And now, with only a few dollars left in his account, he stood at the bank, hoping that what little remained would be enough. Behind him, people whispered impatiently. In front of him stood a man who seemed to belong to a completely different world. Immaculate suit, polished shoes, a watch that probably cost more than Arif had earned in years. His name, as murmurs revealed, was Raza Khurshid, a millionaire known not just for his wealth, but for his arrogance. He was the kind of man who entered rooms expecting them to adjust to him. When Arif finally reached the counter, his voice came out softer than he intended. He explained that he needed to withdraw $50. The teller hesitated, her eyes flickering to the screen, then back to him. There was a problem. A hold on his account. Some minor discrepancy that needed verification. It could take hours. Maybe even a day. Arif felt the ground shift beneath him. Hours? A day? He tried to explain, his voice cracking despite his effort to stay composed. He spoke about his daughter, about the electricity bill, about how he just needed $50, just enough to get through the night. But rules were rules, and the teller's sympathetic expression didn't change the outcome. That was when Raza laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, dismissive, the kind that cuts deeper than words. The entire line seemed to pause, drawn to the sound. Arif froze, his humiliation rising like heat under his skin. Raza stepped closer, his amusement barely concealed, as if the desperation of a struggling father was some sort of spectacle. Arif didn't look at him. He couldn't. Pride, fragile as it was, still held him upright. He swallowed hard, trying to think of another solution. Maybe he could borrow from someone. Maybe he could convince the landlord to wait one more day. But every possibility felt like it was slipping away before he could grasp it. Then something changed. Raza's laughter faded mid-breath. It didn't taper off naturally, it stopped, abruptly, as if someone had pulled a switch. His expression shifted, the arrogance draining from his face, replaced by something unfamiliar. Silence fell heavier than before. His eyes had landed on something Arif hadn't noticed, a small drawing sticking out from the worn edges of Arif's wallet. It was a child's drawing, colorful and uneven, showing a stick figure holding hands with a smaller one under a bright yellow sun. Above them, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "My papa is my hero." Raza stared at it, unmoving. For a moment, the bank disappeared around him. The polished floors, the murmuring crowd, the ticking clock, all faded into the background. What remained was that simple drawing and the quiet truth it carried. Because once, long ago, Raza had received a drawing like that too. His mind drifted back to a memory he had buried beneath years of ambition and success. A small house. A tired man coming home after long days of work. His father. A man who had never had much, but had given everything. Raza remembered the way his father used to count coins at the table, making sure there was enough for food, for school, for life. He remembered how, as a child, he had drawn pictures just like that, simple, innocent declarations of love. And he remembered the day his father had stood in a bank, asking for help, only to be dismissed, laughed at, treated like he didn't matter. Raza had sworn that day he would never be that man. He would never be weak. Never be at the mercy of others. He would rise above it all. And he had. But somewhere along the way, he had also forgotten something else. He had forgotten what it meant to see people, not just situations. To understand struggle, not just observe it. To feel, not just react. Standing there, looking at Arif, Raza felt something crack within him. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. Without saying a word, he stepped forward. The teller looked at him, startled. The people in line leaned in, sensing something unexpected. Raza reached into his pocket and placed his card on the counter. His voice, when it came, was no longer sharp. It was steady, controlled, but different. He instructed the teller to process the withdrawal, not from Arif's account, but from his own. Arif looked up, confused, his exhaustion mixing with disbelief. For a moment, he didn't understand what was happening. Then realization dawned, and with it came a wave of emotions he couldn't quite contain. He tried to refuse. Pride again. It was all he had left to hold on to. But Raza shook his head slightly, his gaze firm but not unkind. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was something else entirely. It was recognition. The transaction went through quickly. $50, simple and small, yet carrying the weight of everything Arif had been fighting against. When the teller handed him the cash, his hands trembled again, but this time, it wasn't just from fear. Raza didn't linger. He didn't offer grand speeches or expect gratitude. As he turned to leave, he paused briefly, his eyes meeting Arif's. In that brief moment, something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. A silent acknowledgement of struggle, of humanity, of the fragile threads that connect people in ways they often forget. Arif nodded, barely perceptible, but enough. And Raza walked away. Outside, the sun was high, casting warmth over the city. It felt different somehow. Lighter. Arif stepped out of the bank, the money clutched tightly in his hand. He took a deep breath, the weight on his chest easing just enough to let hope slip back in. He wasn't saved. His problems hadn't disappeared. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could keep going. That evening, the lights in their small apartment stayed on. Syra sat at the table, coloring another drawing, her face glowing in the soft light. Arif watched her for a moment, his heart aching and healing all at once. He thought about the day, about the man who had laughed, and then stopped. He wondered what had changed. Across the city, in a quiet office overlooking glass towers and endless streets, Raza sat alone. The silence around him was different now. Not empty, but reflective. He opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years and pulled out an old, folded piece of paper. It was faded, the colors dulled by time. A child's drawing. A stick figure holding hands with another. Above them, in uneven writing, were the words, "My Baba is my hero." Raza stared at it, his expression softening in a way it hadn't in years. Sometimes, it doesn't take grand gestures to change a life. Sometimes, it takes a moment. A pause. A memory. A choice. And sometimes, it takes $50. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Take a second to like, share, and comment, because you never know who might need a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. And before we close, here's something special. If you've ever experienced a moment where a stranger's kindness changed your life, or if you believe even small acts can make a big difference, write "Kindness Matters" in the comments below. Because it truly does. That night, as Arif tucked Syra into bed, she handed him her new drawing. It showed the same two figures, standing under a bright sun, but this time, there was a third figure beside them. Arif smiled, his eyes glistening. Heroes don't always wear suits or hold power. Sometimes, they stand in lines, holding worn-out slips of paper, asking for just enough to keep going. And sometimes, they are the ones who choose to stop laughing, and start seeing.